Hi, good evening, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to the launch of John Mackay's new book, Home. We're all delighted to be here, John, for you and to hear all about it. Everybody will probably know that you are a newsreader on Scottish television. That's what I do as well. John and I have worked together for many, many years. So, John, it has been a very, very busy year for COVID reasons, but you've obviously been off doing another project. Has this been your lockdown project?
You would think, Andrea, and can I say thank you to everybody for coming along as well. Very much appreciated you taking the time to do this evening. Is it the COVID project? You would think I'm sure everybody's been doing a project of one sort or another. But actually, this was completed, the first draft of this was completed just before the lockdown really kicked in, maybe the first couple of weeks. So the writing of it was predominantly before lockdown started. The editing has taken place during lockdown, but the actual project itself, I wasn't thinking, here's a chance to write the book that I've been waiting a long time to write. No, it was already done. But COVID was very useful to do other projects, but editing the book was part of it. But no, it isn't a COVID project, surprisingly enough.
So we all want to know, what is Home about?
Well, home is that very essential thing of home, and it's particularly related to Scottish rural areas. Doesn't matter where you are, that people will say, I'm going home, or you're going home. And they're not talking about their house in the city, they're not talking about anything else, they're talking to their sort of ancestral place, if you like. And I think what drove it for me is I have a house, there's a house in my family which has been occupied by members of my family since it was built just before the First World War. And there was a very 20th century, early 21st century, a very dramatic period, and people were leaving this house to go and fight wars, they were going to emigrate, there was all sorts of life going on in this house. And it struck me that we so often hear about history in the terms of the grand houses and the grand families, where actually it's lived with the regular families and the regular houses. So that's what I was trying to capture, rather than looking at the historical figures. How did regular people endure and live and navigate through this last very dramatic 100 years? So that's essentially what it's about.
And it's obviously set in the Western Isles.
Well, yeah, and that wouldn't surprise you, Andrea. As you know, my three previous books have been fiction books, have been set in the Western Isles, and there's a simple reason for that. I have very strong family connections there. My mother was from there, my father's family were from there, and so I've been going there all my life. And although I'm a Glaswegian, born and raised in Glasgow, going to the Western Isles, going to Luath in particular, every year, sometimes more than once, which was such a contrast to the city, was really just quite, it was a magical place. And I realized that as a child, although I perhaps didn't fully appreciate how different it was until I was an adult. And then when I had always had this ambition of writing a book, and I heard years ago, I heard this story, which became what my first book was, The Road Dance. And I thought, if I don't write this story as a book, I'll never write a book. And it was so happened that it was set in the Western Isles, and that suited me really rather well. And I find I can write about it in terms of place and setting. It comes to me fairly easily. So I think that's a reason it's been set there. And people seem to like it. That's the other thing. They seem to like being transported to somewhere different.
It does give you a lovely feel, doesn't it, about being somewhere else. And obviously for people who live in the Western Isles, it's lovely to capture the essence of that very special place.
Well, it's a cause of concern sometimes when you're writing, because I don't live there. I wasn't raised there, and that's a very unique experience. I've always been concerned that anything I'm writing, that somebody who is from the Western Isles might say, that's not really it, that's not what it's like, that's not what it's about. Fortunately, that hasn't happened. People have been very kind about previous writing, and I hope they feel the same about this. And when I get, and we can talk about this later, when you get somebody like Callum MacDonald, who's essentially Hebridean, the Runrig songwriter, saying that you capture the essence of the islands. To me, that's hugely rewarding, because it means you get something right, because it's always a risk. You're writing about something that's so valuable to other people, you don't want to get it wrong.
Can you tell us a little bit about the plot and the characters that are in Home?
Well, previously, what's happened in my other books have all been stories. And you and I, Andy, were journalists, and so we recognise a good story. This is different because it's a saga. So it's actually tying together a whole strand of different stories. Stories that different people have lived down through the years, different families have lived down through the years. So it's a whole myriad web of stories. And there's one arcing story throughout it about a child who, one of the members of the family has a child that's unknown to the family, and they spend their time trying to find out who this child is and will they ever meet this child. But it's not one single story. There are several arcs within it, and it's a whole series of stories. And it's all about different, it's just a very different experience from the previous books, as well as being significantly longer as well.
And what was the inspiration behind it?
Again, when you, I don't know if this applies to all families, but I think those who have a Hebridean background, a Gaelic background, will certainly be aware of this idea how valuable family is. You know, I'd be in Stornoway, my father would say to me, "That fella's a cousin of yours." And who's that cousin? Never met the guy before, never heard of the person before. But this idea, it doesn't matter how distant the family is always there. So I absorbed a lot of that. There's also very much reflecting the past, nostalgia, hearing about characters before, hearing about the experiences that people have had before. And you absorb all of that. All of that began to sink in on me. And I reached a point where I was looking to write something new. And all these stories were kind of buzzing about in my head, and that connection with people, connection with the past. Connection's a word that's used quite a lot. What are your connections? And so that they all sort of fused together to produce Home. So that's essentially what drove it. I needed to write something, and that's what came to me, as opposed to I needed to write something and planning it out that way. That's what came to me.
And so did you base it on your own family history then?
It's informed by my own family history. It would be unfair to my family if I told their history. Frankly, I'm not sure you'd want to hear some of it, but that's a whole different point. No, it is very much informed by my family history. So it stretches from the First World War to the present day. So my own family history, it's more closely aligned to my own family history early on. People going off to war, people emigrating, all of that. Some of my family members will absolutely recognise and say, "Oh, I know who that is," or "I know what that's about." But I think it would be extremely unfair to family members now to put their lives into a book. And
do you think you're going to get any of your family members going, "Hang on, I know who that character is"? Could that get you into trouble?
I don't think they'll get me into trouble, because I don't think anyone comes out of it too bad. I hope they don't come out of it too badly. No, I don't think they will. They will recognise historical figures. I doubt they'll recognise current figures. There is one character who is based on somebody who may still be alive, that I would maybe discuss privately with somebody about. I think there's a character called, and you come to it later on, called Mary, and I think somebody I don't actually know very well, but it's based on, she informs this character. I wouldn't say, is she based on it? Well, maybe she is. It's not her life story, but there are elements of it are based on this, and some people might recognise it. But broadly speaking, for the last, say, 40 years, that wouldn't be the case. But part of the problem you have when you're writing about the Western Isles is that there aren't that many, there's not a great variation of names. So that was one of the challenges. How do you give people different names? Now, in the Western Isles, a lot of the names are the same. So people are given patronymics, the nicknames and all the rest of it. But that's not going to work for a mass audience. That's going to be too complicated. So I had to give some people nicknames, but I also had to use completely different names. So there's a character in it called Dan. I get Western Isles family. I've got a cousin called Dan. It isn't him, but some people might think it's him. I hope he doesn't think it's him. But you can see why it would happen.
I mean, how difficult is it when you're spanning like lots of different decades and lots of different stories are intertwining? How difficult is it to not get really bogged down in I don't know. I mean, how difficult is it as an author to come up with a coherent storyline that has, that beginning, middle, and end?
Well, that phrase you used there, in my previous books, it was a quote I heard which I thought was brilliant. Not a beginning, a middle, and an end, but a beginning, a muddle, and an end. You know how your book starts, and you know how your book ends, and how do you work your way through that? So that was always a challenge. I think the challenge more in this one was I was fairly sure what all the different stories would be. What I had to avoid doing was, this is not a history book. So sometimes I would concern myself with, well, how did they do that, or what date was that? Would that vehicle have been there at this particular time? And I had to convince myself, well, look, don't look at it in those terms, because this isn't pretending to be an academic book. It's a story with a historical background. So that was the biggest challenge. I suppose the other challenge, and people will find this when they read the book, and is that there are so many people in it that it was actually beginning to get quite difficult for people, because I got a couple of people, close friends, to read the book beforehand to see what they made of it. And the one thing that was clearly difficult for them was there are so many people, so many different strands, that they began to lose the place. Who's who? So what we've actually done, just to clarify all of that, is each chapter begins with a family tree. So you can see who's connected to who in what way. And that makes it a lot clearer for people. Well, I hope it does.
Interesting, right? And so did it take a long time then to put together and to write?
Well, with all my writing, it does. And the reason for that is Luath Press, my publisher, they don't give you a deadline. And Gavin, the director, is always very much just, it's ready when it's ready. Well, we work in broadcasting. We know that a deadline's what you need. Otherwise, you just sit there. No, you wouldn't sit there. You'd be very professional, obviously, but you maybe don't have that sense of urgency. So my very first book, for example, probably took maybe about 4 or 5 months, maybe even 6 months to write, but that was over a period of 5 or 6 years. Well, Home's been a bit like that. The first chapter of Home was written, maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. But the actual, and I kept on meaning to go back to it, but there were other distractions, other projects to be done. So I think it came down to being written in about 6 months, the actual basic writing. And then the editing took a bit longer than that. So what I'm saying is that sometimes the books take a long time to write, but actually the writing period is not overly long. You know, it's quite, if I concentrated it all together, then it wouldn't be that long.
Do you enjoy that process? I mean, do you like the writing part of it, or do you feel pressured? Or how does it just flow? I mean, is it easy for you?
The best times, Andrea, are when it flows, and sometimes it does. Sometimes you get into a zone and you're following a subject or a topic, and it's just flowing, and you lose time, you lose wherever you are, and you look back on it and you think, really, that was really quite pleased with that. That was good. I didn't realize I'd written so much. But more typically, it's a case of, all right, this will happen. And how do I get it to go to there? And it's more of a slog to get it done. And the key to that is discipline. That you don't sit and look at the empty keyboard. You write, and you know that maybe what you're writing isn't ever going to get into the final book, but you're doing it simply to keep yourself going. So a lot of people will plot out their books, will plot out their screenplays. And that's good. That's what you would be advised to do. But I struggle with that. And the best ideas for me come when I'm writing the actual book. And that was very much the case this time. So I would say 25%, it flows, you're in a zone and it goes really well. 75% of it, it's a struggle. I'm maybe overstating that, but it's not easy. And the greatest satisfaction, I think most writers would tell you this, the greatest satisfaction is when it's finished, the first draft's finished. I enjoy the editing process. I enjoy making it better, but my goodness, getting to that point can be quite. I remember. So again, I had no experience. When I wrote my first book, I didn't know any authors. I didn't have any tutoring or anything. I was doing this off my own back, and when I finished it, it was around about 63,000 words, which is really short. Most novels are about 80,000 and upwards. So. How am I going to stretch this out? That wasn't the case with Home. Home, I'd written quite so much that actually quite a lot of it's been taken out. And again, that was a new experience for me. But what it did mean was that you're not trying to find ways of extending it. You're actually cutting out some of the chaff, and what's left hopefully is very much the best.
Did you have to make any major significant changes to it then?
We did actually. I say we did because I was, as I say, I showed some friends and family the book, and a couple of really good suggestions were made to me. So the book was originally, it's very significant changes. The book was originally, the idea that I had when I started writing it was I would have a chapter per decade. So each chapter would cover a decade. But that was very dense. You're talking about 100 years. There was something of the order of more than 100,000 words in it, and that was very dense. Each chapter could be very long. So among other things, a couple of people said, well, why don't you make the chapters shorter? And that's what I did. And so that was, some of the people at Luath said that, my son said that, some close friends said that. And sometimes you need that light bulb moment, somebody else to say, why don't you? And straight away you're thinking, yeah, that's, I absolutely see the sense in that. So it went from 10 very thick, dense chapters to about 35 much easier, more digestible chapters. So that was we didn't lose much of the writing, but the way it was broken down hopefully will make it easier for people to read.
Can I just say to everybody who is listening in tonight, there will be a Q&A session at the end. And so if you do have any questions that you would like John to answer, then please just do write them in the chat, and we'll try and get to them at the end in about 25 minutes or so. But I'll plough on if you don't mind at the moment.
Do get questions. Get as many questions in as we can.
Yeah. So this is your fourth book that's set on the Isle of Lewis. Why do you think that Lewis is such a great place to base your books?
Well, it is. It's so different. Anybody who goes there, it's a completely different experience for them. It's and as I say, for me as a city kid, it was. I think I appreciated it more as an adult. As a kid, you just thought it was this magical place to go and run about and disappear all day and do things that you would never normally do. But as an adult, I fully appreciated just how significant it was, how distinct it was. And specifically, my mother came from a village in Lewis, in the west coast of Lewis, called Garnan, which is well known as a Black House village. And what that means is very traditional stone-built single-story houses that were very much a feature of the 19th, early 20th century. Now all these homes are pretty much gone. Most of these black houses have gone, they were knocked down, but a few still remain. And in Lewis and Garnan in particular, the village has been recreated as a holiday village. But I actually remember people still living in these houses originally. And that's, again, as a kid, you just think it's fascinating. These people full of character, really warm and all the rest of it, getting into these houses, unlike anything I ever saw in the city. And as a child, you think this is just great. But as an adult, you realize this is just so different from anything else. And that's what makes it a good place to write about. And the common thing you'll often hear for authors is, or writers, potential writers, is write what you know about. So I could write about Glasgow, although I actually think I would struggle to do that a bit more. But I feel I know Lewis as a place, if nothing else, and so I find it quite easy to write there.
And you've had some great endorsements. I mean, Lorraine Kelly, Callum MacDonald of Runrig, as you mentioned earlier. That must be great when you've put so much work into it to get lovely endorsements from them. Well,
it is. I have to say that the Callum MacDonald endorsement is I'm very grateful to them both, and to other people who have read it and been very kind. So, well, first of all, I'll speak about Lorraine. So Luath approached Lorraine. I know Lorraine kind of through STV Appeal and such, but Luath approached Lorraine's agent. Do you think Lorraine would be interested in reading the book? And came back very quickly with this really nice endorsement. And I'm not gonna kid on. I thought, there's no way she could have read that. No way. So I emailed the agent just to say, pass on my thanks to Lorraine. It was very kind of her. And she sent me a personal email saying she went into a lot of detail of how much she'd enjoyed it. So quite clearly she had read it. And that, you know, Lorraine Kelly is a lovely person, very honest person. So there's no, I think I was just surprised more than anything else. That's where the doubt came from. So that was really kind. But Callum MacDonald, for me, a lot of times you'll be asked as a writer, who are your biggest influences? And people usually mean writers, you know, what books have you read? And what authors have inspired you and all the rest of it. And there's a degree, for most writers, that's true, that there is an element of that. But for me, I have to say that my greatest influence comes from lyricists, songwriters, because of the imagery they create and the way they put words together. And there was nobody greater for me than Callum MacDonald of Runrig. Him and his brother Rory have produced just such an incredible body of work. And it was very important to me at a very early stage as well, because as I've said, I was raised in the city, but the city was outside the door. When I went back in the door, it was very much Hebridean. My mother, as I say, was from Luath. My father was from Govan, but his parents were from Luath. So a lot of my parents' social life was very much based in the Gaeltacht and Gaelic culture and all of that. Whereas outside there was none of that. It was the charts, it was all the rest of it that anybody would have in an urban environment. So what Runrig did when their first album came out was cross that divide for me. I could make that connection. I could say to people, listen to this. I'd give them the Runrig album, listen to that. And people really taken with it. So straight away, that's as early as 1978, that Runrig's first album came out. So from then on, I can mark all the years by Runrig albums because they've been so influential to me. And when I first came to write, I think maybe if Runrig hadn't been there, you might have thought, does anybody want to hear about the Gaeltacht, about the Hebrides? Well, yeah, they do, because Runrig had proved how important that is. And then Callum MacDonald's, as I say, his lyricism, his imagery has been the single biggest creative influence in my life. So for him to endorse Home, I can't, that's a huge thrill. I mean, that really is, that's a big deal for me.
It must be lovely. I mean, we spoke about this before. I mean, and I was saying to you, are you nervous about, actually launching the book? And you're like saying it's kind of like putting your little child out to school for the first time. But so it must be nervous but exciting. And when you get endorsements, it must make it feel all the worthwhile.
It does. It absolutely does. So that's exactly what it's like, particularly the first book, but the first 3 fictional books I wrote. It's exactly as you say. You've nurtured this thing. You've seen it from creation, and you're now ready to send it into the world. And you go, oh, how's it going to go? What are people going to think of it? And it's quite nerve-wracking. But exactly as you say, because Callum MacDonald has said it's okay, I couldn't care less.
Job done.
Yeah, job done. I hope you like the way I've displayed them here, just behind me anyway, just so I can.
Yes, indeed.
Part of the set dressing, so that this is the book, incidentally, that we're talking about. But the fact that I can point to somebody and say, Callum MacDonald said that. So yeah. For me, that's huge. And also Lorraine Kelly as well, because she has a lot of people trust her, she's very influential. So for her to say it as well, brilliant.
There's been quite a gap between your last book, Last of the Line in 2006, and this one coming out. Yeah. Why such a long gap?
Well, the Last of the Line, as you say, was 2006, and my thought process then was, right, I'll try and do a book every couple of years. But it was round about then that they started thinking about getting The Road Dance, my first book, made into film. And so I started thinking, right, so the story behind that is that David Hayman, the Scottish actor, whom I knew as an interviewee at STV, I didn't know David as such, but I knew him to speak to. And he was in STV, and he said, I read that book of yours. He said, that's really cinematic. That could be a really good film. So it hadn't occurred to me. I'd never even thought about it. But at that point, I'm thinking, yeah. And of course, you've got, as you know, from working in news, a lot of what we do in news is sub. So you take longer copy and you sub it down to shorter copy. Well, I thought that's what a screenplay is. You just take the book, you sub it down, there's your screenplay. No. It's a completely different art, which I only found out having repeatedly failed to do it properly. So I went through various drafts of writing screenplays, and then with no great success. And also being involved with production companies trying to raise funding for these movies. So that was and that's come to fruition now. Incidentally, not with my script, not that I'm bitter or anything, but so we had that was one of it. That was one strand of the delay. Second strand of the delay was I also did a non-fiction book called Notes of a Newsman, which that was published in 2015. So that took up a bit of time. That's basically covering the 30 years of my journalistic career. And then very finally, as you know, it's been a very busy news decade in Scotland for the last decade and more. So the job also needs a lot of.
It gets in the way, doesn't it?
It does actually.
Well,
You're not joking. Oh, I gotta go to work. It was going so well. So these three factors are the main reasons for the principal reasons for the big gap between the fiction books.
and can you tell us where the road dance is at in the film production side of things?
Well, so it's been a long saga. So anybody who knows me will have heard all of this. So it has gone through various production companies have tried to make it happen. It now has happened. It's been filmed, it's been completed, and it's been accepted at the Edinburgh Film Festival. So it should be released, I think, in late August. They may decide to go for another festival. This has all been done by American producers, so they're keeping me informed, but I don't have any part of the decision-making process. But as things stand, I anticipate that hopefully it might be part of the Edinburgh Film Festival, so that would see a release round about end of August. But it is ready. It's ready to go. And
fantastic. I'm just going to click on here because there's some questions coming in about that. Let's just see. Stuart Burns has said, hopefully the film, The Road Dance, will be a great success. Would this be likely to lead on to your other books being adapted for the screen?
Stuart, thank you as ever for being supportive, as I've said before to you. Thank you for your interest. I would like to think so, but it's a real the experience of The Road Dance, which I think is the most obvious one to get made into a film, has been long and drawn out and challenging, and with a lot of failure along the way. So I would like to think that maybe the other books, Heartland, Last in the Line, even Home, could be made into. Well, Home might be more a TV series potentially. Could be made into films, but there's no immediate prospect of that happening at the moment. No, they have the potential, I think, but it's not happening at the moment.
And you were an extra in the film, is that right? Tell us about that.
Crofter number 3 or 4, I can't quite remember which one. Honestly, Andrea, if you see the film, don't blink, because if you do, you'll miss my dazzling performance at the back of The Road Dance. So The Road Dance is literally a dance on the road, dancerat. It's a dance on the road. So one of the very few specifications I made to the American producers was that my son, who's a very accomplished piper, be a bagpiper. So they said, yep, that's fine, he'll do that at The Road Dance. But then the director said to me, do you fancy a cameo role yourself? And, well, why not? Why wouldn't you? So my other son and I were crofters at the back of the dance. What was really funny about that, and I don't know if it'll come across in the movie, the day we filmed it was horrendous. It was last October in Garnan. And Garnan sits right onto the Atlantic. It's just wind, rain, and it was miserable. People going blue. And if you actually see the ground's sodden when they're doing the dancing. And also the lead actors were being kept as they should be kept very warm and all the rest of it in one of the black houses, and just brought out for their scenes so they could go back in and warm up.
You didn't get a caravan?
Didn't even no. Well, the black houses. I'd take the black house over the caravan, to be honest. I mean, they're very snug inside. They're all, they're not back in the 19th century. They've been very much updated for modern living. But they would come out, and one character I remember particular, she was supposed to walk down to the dance and kind of look really, the dance, marvelous and all of great fun. And she did her best to do it, but all the while the rain's just hitting into her eyes. Oh. All this kind of thing. So yeah, it was. I had the great pleasure of being on set. I don't think I'm on the cutting room floor, but it is a blink and you'll miss it all.
Great stuff. Are there plans for any more books? I mean, now I know we've only just got to the launch of Home, but already can we expect any more? Yeah, well,
I would like to think so. A lot of the thing about writing is the discipline of doing it, and I've got ideas. What actually will decide this is how well received Home is. So there could be a follow-up to Home, which I have in my mind that I pretty much know where it would go and how it would be written. But there is also a kind of, I sometimes wonder if I should try different genres, try something different. And so there's a screenplay that I'm working on at the moment that could become a novel. So that would be a completely different direction. So Yes, will there be more? The plan is there will be more. What it will be at this point in time, I don't yet know, but I need to commit to something before the summer's over.
Okay, I mean, I'm impressed that you are, you know, because I mean, the day job isn't, you know, without its stresses. So, I mean, do you find it going? I mean, do you go home at night after, you know, a long day in news and write? I mean, do you find it quite cathartic? Is it a good way to switch off from the day job, or how do you juggle the both of them?
It's quite the opposite. I present current affairs program called Scotland Tonight, and because of that, and because I'm presenting the news in STV Central for 5 nights a week, then I actually usually have time off in the mornings, and that's when I write. I'm a morning person. I'm not great at night time, which is a bit of a challenge for Scotland Tonight, I have to tell you. But that's a whole different story. So I tend to write in the morning. I'm fresh in the morning. And I tend to maybe think ideas when my head's clear as early in the morning. So that's actually the best time for me. Not late at night. Late at night, as you say, you know, what we do is it might not appear it, but it is actually quite challenging at times. So yeah, when I come home in the evening, I'm done. But so the morning's the time that I write. And interestingly, I would like to get that discipline. There's a great anecdote by the author Stephen King, obviously hugely successful. And the key to writing is discipline. Get actually writing it down. You hear so many people say, oh, I'd like to this, and maybe I write a book. Well, you've got to write it first. That's what you've got to do. So Stephen King talks about, and I think I may have the detail wrong, but the principle of what I'm saying here is right. He says that he writes 2,500 words a day. So he starts, I think, at 6 o'clock in the morning. And if he's finished his 2,500 words by 8 o'clock in the morning, that's him done for the day. But if he's still at it at 5 o'clock in the evening, he's still at it at 5 o'clock in the evening. He's got to get his 2,500 words done. And if he finishes that 2,500 words in the middle of a sentence, that's when he finishes. So that's his
Really?
words. Yeah. I was telling somebody else this, Frank Rennie, an academic in the Western Isles, and he was saying that Graham Greene apparently had the same principle, but for him it was only 800 words, which I think that's yeah.
I mean, do you have a process? I mean, do you have a lucky pen? Do you have a lucky, you know, I mean, what do you do? Do you sit down with a big fat cigar at 6 in the morning? What is your writing process?
I tend to sit here and just force myself to do it. Right, start writing. That's pretty much, and it definitely flows. The more you do it, the more it flows. The more that the ideas come to you, and that you find that. So the more you do, the easier it becomes. But no, there's no lucky thing. I deliberately avoid superstition because that can hang you up. The very first writing I did for the road dance, I did in longhand. I don't do that now. I didn't even complete that book in longhand. So it's simply a case of sitting with a keyboard and just starting to get it flow. And sometimes, as I say, what you write to begin with won't ever appear, but it gets you going, and it's like a starter. And that's a significant part of that.
Okay, let's go to some of these questions, okay, because we're getting quite a lot in, and I want to get through other people's questions. So let's start with Thomas. Thomas Daly said, are there any lessons that you want your readers to get from your books, and if so, what?
That's a good question, Thomas. I don't like to give people lessons. Who am I to give anyone any lessons? I don't like being preached to myself. So no, there are no lessons, but what the books are about, principally my books are about identity and belonging. I suppose that's a theme that runs through them all. And the value of knowing who you are and where you're from. So if people pick that up from it and love a place, wherever their place may be, then I think that's a good thing. But it's certainly not a lesson. You know, I wouldn't set myself up to do that. But these are recurring themes through my books: identity and belonging.
Okay. From social media, we have somebody who's asked, do you find any inspiration from your job as a newsreader?
Not for the fiction novels I've written so far. I got a notion for writing another one that's rooted in our job, but not really that. What our job does do, though, and you will know this, is to identify the value of a story. What's an important story? what's a good story and how to develop that story, how to set that story down. So I wouldn't say there's any creative influence from our work, excuse me, but I definitely think that there are practical influences that come to bear. And also, you know, we cover an awful lot of stories, some of them very sad, some of them very funny. And sometimes there's an element of a story you think, right, I can maybe use that. But not as a general rule. I don't think so, no.
Okay. You know, you've got the book behind you there. We had somebody asking, can you tell us about the landscape that you've chosen for your book cover?
I can. So in its full glory, so that is the landscape. That's a photograph I took about 25 years ago. 25 years ago. So I don't know if you can see how clearly you can see it, but so this is a series of crofts, and this was taken from the bottom of the crofts, looking up a hill to these various croft houses. And very significantly, that house there on the spine is really what the book's about. It isn't that house in terms of, but that's the inspiration for the book. The story on the spine, the book on the spine. That's the house my mother was born in. So that has been the inspiration for it, and I suppose that's cover captures it really well. So that's in the west coast of the Isle of Lewis, and it's credit to the one of the Luath team. I originally had an idea of maybe different images of individual houses, but the Luath team said, no, that's a really strong image. And I think they're right now. I wasn't sure at the time. It's also worth mentioning, so that's going uphill to these houses. The original title of the book was House in the Hill. It wasn't called Home to begin with. But the title of the book changed partly because I realised there had been an STV series called House in the Hill. Many moons ago. I didn't want them clashing, but these houses are all on a hill, so that was also part of the idea behind that. But also, I sent Luath a number of images, and that was almost an afterthought. That was about the last one I sent them, and I think that's
the one they chose.
And I think they're right to do so. It's the more I see it, the more I like it.
Lovely. Linda Wilson is asking, will it be published in Gaelic?
That's a really good question, Linda. It not by any translation from me, I regret to say. I wouldn't be capable of it. But it certainly, you know, it would certainly lend itself to that. There are some Gaelic phrases in it. But my Gaelic disappeared a long time ago. I didn't speak Gaelic, but my mother would speak to me in Gaelic, and I would perfectly understand that. But that's long gone. I'm way beyond that now. So beyond sláinte and other similar phrases.
The important ones.
The important ones, yeah. Talking of which, I'm just going to take a drink, sláinte. But
go for it. I think you deserve it.
So I think it would lend itself to being translated into Gaelic, but it's not something I could do.
Okay. I think somebody did, I haven't seen the question pop up, but I think I did see someone ask, do you speak Gaelic? So there we go. You've answered the question.
So I understand bits of Gaelic. No, I couldn't say that. When I was younger, I did. And I heard it when I heard it in the home and all the rest of it. But that's a long time ago now. I do have a Gaelic O-grade. I don't even know if people know what an O-grade is anymore. But I do have a Gaelic qualification, which... No, that hasn't helped me in any way at all. It's been the media. I wish I'd stuck at it, because the media would help us quite a lot, as you know. There's a Gaelic.
It's very, yeah. It's okay. Like, so Bill Evans is asking, possibly he's got an idea for your next novel. It could be set on St Kilda.
It could. In fact, there is a new. I've just been given this actually by Luath. This is St Kilda, a book about St Kilda.
Oh.
The Cuckoo Stone, so that's all about St Kilda. Yeah, you could. St Kilda's you were asking about setting a book in the Western Isles, and there can be few better places to set some sort of story than St Kilda. Unfortunately, I haven't been, so I wouldn't feel I'd know it well enough to write about it. But it is you're absolutely right, Bill, a wonderful setting for a novel.
It would take you a long time to get there, and you don't know if you want to stay there on your own.
Well, there's that. Yeah, I mean, I think you can sail from Harris, and coincidentally, I'm going up to Lewis next week, and some of my family are going over to St Kilda from Skye. but it's not something I'm going to join them on. What is it, 3.5-hour sail or something? So, yeah.
In
So
pretty open waters, I think.
It is open waters. They can't even guarantee you'll sail. My sea legs are okay. I mean, I can do the inch okay from Ullapool across to Stornoway, but 3.5 hours on a small boat to St Kilda.
Yeah, I know.
Good with that.
Okay, Gillian Harvey has asked a really good question. Any tips for budding authors who are wanting to start writing their first book?
If it's a Gillian I'm thinking, hi Gillian, thank you very much for taking part in this. You write it. That's it. You know, you if you have an idea, write it down. Don't necessarily think the first thing that you put down is necessarily going to be in the finished work, but just get writing. Write as much as you can. Get your story down. Get it completed. Then you can hone it and you can work at it. But until you do that, then it's not going to happen. So discipline is the key thing. And I would also suggest that show it to some trusted confidants who to get an idea of how important it is, or how it can be changed, how it can be improved. And there's some, so you'll get a lot of people who will read your book and they might genuinely like it and say, you know, that's I really liked it, and that's good to hear. But it's also just as good to hear people saying, well, maybe you shouldn't do that, or maybe you shouldn't, maybe adjust this, just a thought, change the beginning. And I do that. I do that too. So my son Kenny, for example, made a few suggestions. I have a close friend Laura who made a few suggestions about how this can be improved, and that was really valuable because I wouldn't have seen it myself. And it sometimes takes somebody else to do it. So, Gillian, get your thing written and then show it to some trusted people, and keep honing it from there. But you've got to write it first.
Actually, related to that, you know, for starting out, it must be such a daunting prospect, you know, to write a book. And you don't have an agent, and you haven't sort of followed that familiar path to publication, have you?
No, I still don't have an agent. Just leave that hanging there. Okay, now I'll move on. So I did it completely differently. I had the ambition to write a book, as I say. I wrote the book, but then I went through that fairly tortuous process of sending it to publishers and getting rejected a lot all the time. Any number of rejections, which can be quite soul destroying. And the reason an agent is actually quite useful to have is that a lot of publishers will use the agent as a clearinghouse for them. So the agent is sending it to them, they think, well, it must have something, as opposed to just a cold calling. So I didn't do any of that, get an agent or anything like that. And I was very lucky that Luath picked me up on it. And I actually sent it to Luath. I followed it up with a phone call, and it was through a conversation with director Gavin that I managed to pitch the book to him. But no, my whole writing career, even the same with the movie, it wasn't through any organized, planned, strategic action I took that any of that happened. It's just been kind of finding my way along. And I don't know how typical that is.
Any plans for it to be an audiobook, we've been asked?
It is an audiobook. Well, it will be. The audio has been recorded. Indeed, the audio for the previous 3 books have been recorded. So I think it'll be about a month. I was asking Luath about that. It'll take about a month for the audiobook to become available. But it has been recorded, so it's ready to go.
Did you record it, John?
I did, yeah. So I did wonder about that, getting an actor or getting an actor to do it, a voice artist to do it. But I suppose
John, you are a voice artist, surely.
Sorry?
You must be a voice artist.
Well,
you've been on TV for long enough.
Yeah, but you can't read everything like that. It's got to be a wee bit more relaxed. Anyway, so I tried to be an actor. So I worked very closely with a sound engineer at STV called Cy Jack. And we did all 4 books. Now, I don't know if anybody who hasn't read The Road Dance may be aware that there's a birth scene in The Road Dance. So that's, Cy and I have agreed never to talk about that moment again. As I impersonated a woman giving birth. I'm not sure I can ever hear it myself again. But certainly the home has been recorded, yeah. A very interesting thing about recording it. So you write a manuscript and you go through it and you pick up any errors, and you go through it. Every time you go through, you'll pick up typos, mistakes, grammatical errors, and other people do the same. And it still will have an error in it, always. Just the brain tricks tricks you into seeing things that aren't there. But when I recorded the audiobook and I was having to read it out loud, so this has been after it been through my own sub-editing, various other people reading it, copy reading it, picking out errors, typos. It was only when I read the audio that another 20, 25 errors just jumped out at you, because you're not reading it in your head, you're reading it out loud, and when you stumble on it, that was interesting. But the original question is there an audiobook? Hopefully within a month, but it's certainly been recorded and ready to go.
Cool. Heather McLeod has asked, do you sketch a plan of the story from beginning to end?
Hi, Heather. I did with Home. I had an idea. I didn't physically write too much of it down, but I had an idea in my head. That hasn't been the case with the previous books, The Road Dance, Heartland, or Last of the Line. That has really flown from writing. So you may have an idea of where you think it's going to go, a rough idea in your head, but when you're writing, something becomes clearer to you. You get in, it's a strange thing, but you begin to live your characters' lives, and you maybe begin to understand or think, actually, they would make a different choice here. So I find for me, it works better not to be too structured, and that letting it, that thing I said to the beginning, having a beginning, a muddle, and an end, muddling the way through, and then then you get to the end point. But in contrast to that, I've written, when you do a screenplay, and I don't know screenplay is fully transferred into film yet, but you do have to structure that. That's one of the things I've learned. So screenplay is very structured. I think a lot of authors would tell you in books, yeah, do structure it, but I don't.
Do you feel like your radar is always on now? Because you're always looking for things, little snippets or anything that you can make into a story, or that you can take as an idea and run with or develop?
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes you wish that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I was going to say, it must be exhausting.
and people watching is an amazing thing, which particularly the current day and age can be a bit risky. But just watching, if you're in a coffee shop or something, and just somebody is doing something, and it just can capture you. You think, oh, that's a really interesting characteristic or something. Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point. You're constantly absorbing things. And as I say, although the news doesn't influence us particularly in terms of writing, there are wee nuggets you pick up and oh, that could have happened, or that could have happened. So go back to, there's a few things happening in Home that I know happened, otherwise I couldn't have written about them. And I suppose an even better example, well, there's a character, okay, so there's a character in Home who goes off to marry somebody she's never met in a different country. So I know that happened. And if I didn't know that had happened in this culture, then I would have thought that's improbable. I don't think that could happen. But I know it did happen, not uncommonly. So that gives you the confidence to say, yeah, right, I can write about that, assuredly knowing that there's a truth to that.
Okay, we've got a question here from Katie Martin. I'm just wondering if it's Katie Martin that we know at STV. Who's our
Hi, Katie.
Hello, Katie. Katie's asking, did you see a potential career as a fiction writer back when you were at school or university?
No, I didn't. Frankly, I don't see it as a career now because it's not the most lucrative things to do. But I had the ambition. I certainly had the ambition to do it. This all goes back to a teacher of mine. I went to a school called Penlee Secondary in Glasgow. And there was a teacher there called Lindsay MacDonald who picked up on my interest in writing. I really enjoyed creative writing. And she said, have you ever thought of, you enjoy writing so much, have you ever thought trying to write a book? And I hadn't. But that planted an ambition within me that I thought, yeah, this is something I'd really like to do. She also said, have you ever thought of journalism as a career? Which up to that point I hadn't. So a huge influence. And like so many kids, the poverty of aspiration sometimes, just somebody to raise your level. I hadn't never thought of that. Yeah, that's something maybe to be ambitious about. So I didn't see it as a career, no, but it was an ambition since school to write a novel, Katie. That was always something I wanted to do. And I felt great. Probably feel more satisfaction from that than anything other in my professional life, probably, I would say. Yeah.
Really, that's lovely. Anne-Marie Wood has asked a couple of questions, John. She said, could you have imagined that you'd be here today talking about your book and upcoming film when you were a fresh-faced journalist? I don't remember you being a fresh-faced journalist. No, I'm only joking.
I've lost track of that as well, Andrea. I've lost track of that. We were both fresh-faced at one point. No, I didn't. And it's, again, a very good point. No, I never did envisage that. But this is very different, again, from what's happened in previous books, because this is all online. Previously, when we've done book launches, they have been, you're doing it in front of people. They're standing there watching you. And I can't see anybody here tonight. I'm grateful for everyone being here, but I can't see you. But it's actually slightly more comfortable for me because it's more my, I talk into a camera each night to hundreds of thousands of people, and I'm fine with that. But standing in front of maybe 50, 60 people at a book launch is really quite nerve-wracking. No, I never envisaged it, but I'm delighted that I can.
It is a very different book launch. How are you finding it?
Well, the book launches can go so many ways. They can be hugely successful, but they can be very successful. You get a lot of people turning out and sitting there signing books, and they want to talk about your books. That's great. But then you get the other side of that when, and it has happened once, nobody turns up. Oh, that's bad. Oh, believe me, that's bad. You usually always get a few people coming. I'm always so grateful to these people. But and I'm not trying to say that this is burned onto my soul, but it was at Waterstones in the Eastwood Centre. I remember that clearly. And I turned up and I sat down, and the book manager, the store manager, had put the table there and the water there. She'd set it up just as you would, and no criticism there. And I was expected to sit there for an hour. After about 35 minutes, I just said, I think I'll head off. Yeah, probably. There's one other one, actually. Some people will have heard these stories before, but there was also W.H. Smith in Kilmarnock. Again, not that it's burned in my mind. So I went into the shop, and the guy said, I've never done this before, but I've set you down the bottom of aisle 4. Well, normally you get to the front, you're right at the front door, so people can actually see you. So anyway, I'm down at the bottom of aisle 4 among the travel books. Again, nobody coming near until this couple came down, and they're showing some interest. I thought, oh, maybe one book, that'd be great. And she said to me, excuse me, she said, can you recommend a book for the Loch Torridon area? So
were you able to help her?
I recommended my own. I said, yeah, this one's great.
This is it. Just try it.
So this is a very different experience.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe hopefully not so painful. So Anne-Marie had also asked another question. How have your books been received back home in the Western Isles? I mean, and are you planning to do a launch there?
Well, I fortunately they've been received very well. I haven't had I've had nobody who's saying to me that you misrepresent the place, or it's not like that at all. Fortunately, people have always been very kind about that, which is a great relief to me. So in terms of a launch up there, I think it's very possible. I don't know what that might be. There's also the movie coming out, so there may be a tie-in between the film in the Western Isles and the book in the Western Isles. So I would hope that there would be, but at this point in time, there's been nothing confirmed, and a lot of that's down to the pandemic and the restrictions under which we're all operating. So that has caused issues. But yes, I hope I'd be able to go up there for some sort of event.
Okay, I've got one last question for you. There's a little minx called Kellyanne Woodland. Now that may ring a bell, and if it doesn't to anybody that's listening, Kellyanne is John's co-host when he reads the news. Kellyanne is asking, when you're in your study in full flow and totally in the zone, writing away happily, do you ever find it hard tearing yourself away to head into the newsroom and the studio, or is it nice having a balance?
No, I do find it hard. I do. It is good. I love my job. I'm very lucky. I love my job. I work with great colleagues, worked with yourself in the past, Andrea. I work with Kellyanne now. So I genuinely feel really fortunate doing the job I do. But when you are in those occasions when you are in the zone and things are really flowing for you, it's awfully difficult to close the laptop and say, right, I need to go and address the world, or Scotland at least. There's a great line that I picked up a few years ago, which I think sums up the job we do really well. And you contrast that with the thrill of what you're writing and all the rest of it, whatever happens to be going on the page at that particular moment. But I heard the phrase that, you know, our job is to say good evening and then explain why it's not. For me, that's absolutely, absolutely.
We're here to put a damp squib into the proceedings. Well, John, we were almost out of time. I mean, that's crazy how quickly that hour has passed. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we end tonight?
I would just say that thank you to everybody who's taken part. I genuinely appreciate it. It's a big commitment to give up an hour of your evening. And although, in terms of the book Home, although it's set in the Western Isles and it's a Western Isles family, the experience of the family within that book is the experience of, I would say, pretty much every family in Scotland and the UK. It's every family's story. So I hope that if you decide to buy the book, and I'll be very grateful if you do, that you will make a connection with it. You can see connections with your own family and your own family history, and I think you'll hopefully enjoy it all the more for that.
Great stuff. Okay, well, John, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for asking me to ask you the questions. I hope I asked the right ones, and I hope I've managed to get around quite a lot of the listeners as well, and put your questions to John. And good luck with the book. We can't wait to see it. We can't wait to read it, and then come back to you with our analysis of it. So good luck, and yeah, thanks for having us.
And thank you for doing it, Andrea. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.